Greetings. So, last chapter, this is the continuing read of A Benny's Song by Djeli Clark. Last chapter was chapter 11, and the revelation that Auntie Asha was not a witch or an old woman, but she was actually a spirit who had chosen to care for that forest, that expansive forest. Now think of a rainforest in your head and how dense rainforest. If you ever seen a picture of a rainforest, or if you've ever seen like movies that were shot in dense forests, or if you had the pleasure, the luxury, the privilege of traveling to a rainforest and seeing it firsthand, the denseness of such a forest. And from what we've read about Auntie Asha's skill set, she's able to tap into nature and have it cover. So it makes sense that the village was protected all this time from outside witches like the witch priest and his soldiers, his army. But when the forest began to be diminished in the ways that it was, she couldn't hide them any longer. After all those centuries, she couldn't. And the witch priest came looking for her to snatch up her powers and add her powers, her light, to his darkness. He found that village. Why not put his flag there and keep it moving? And a lot of what happened on the continent of Africa wasn't just outside Europeans, Portuguese, starting with the Portuguese coming and just physically overpowering the continent. It was a lot of spiritual manipulation that occurred, and swallowing up spirits like Auntie Asha, but she wasn't with it. She was all light. She didn't want to have anything to do with the harm that went into the witch priest's agenda. In order for him to stamp his flag, everything else has to be destroyed and discarded, just because your one way is the only way. So, yeah, Auntie Asha is no longer the old woman. She has now been, that version of her has now been destroyed. But she is forever, like she told, like she let Abeni know, life, death is a circle. So now she is at the child version of her circle of life. And Abeni is her guardian, her reluctant guardian, but she is her guardian. Thankfully, she is a spirit, so she's not just a regular little girl. But she's needed help. Even when she was an old woman, she needed help. That's why she came and got Abeni, saved her from what happened to the rest of the people in her village. So these two are off into the forest in search of Auntie Asha's sister, who is also a spirit. And Abeni wasn't upfront with young Asha about her true reason for joining her on her journey. It's not just to find Auntie Asha someone to care for her, or little Asha to find someone to care for her, a guardian for her, but it's also to find out information, because Abeni wants to get revenge for real. And what else is she gonna do? Stay there in the forest by the water just by herself? But telling the whole story to little girl Asha, what's the point? So she's joining her on her journey, but she has her own reasons as well. She has her own hidden agenda, so to speak. She's starting to become like the adults and keeping secrets because Asha isn't ready for the entire story as a child. She can't handle it. So it's like Benny's starting to understand why adults don't necessarily tell the entire story. It's not, is it a secret, or is that at a certain age and stage of life, we're not ready to hear what the adults around us or the guides around us would like to teach us, but only when we're ready. So yeah, chapter 12 is about spirits. So it's spirits with an S. Auntie Asha, or Asha, just Asha, isn't the only spirit. According to African diasporic tradition, there's spirits for everything, for the wind, for the water, for the thunder, for the lightning, for the day, for the night, for different animals, for earth, for everything. There are spirits for everything. Spirit is all around us, always. And let's see what happens when they get deep into the forest, the spirits in that particular forest. Let's go. Over the next few days, Asha led them through the forest as they made their way to her sister. At times, Abeni let her walk ahead, following at a safe distance. But most often, the girl liked to hold her hand, tugging to signal the direction they were to take. How she knew what that was exactly, Abeni had no idea. She had asked as much, eager to learn where the little spirit was leading them. But Asha responded each time with a shrug. "It feels right," was all she would say. Abeni eyed her doubtfully while taking in their unfamiliar surroundings. They had gone far now, roaming into parts of the forest she no longer recognized. It was hard to wander around the bush on just feelings, especially when the one you were following looked and acted like a little girl. Asha's attention drifted a lot. She stopped to ooh and ah at colorful beetles or hooted up at monkeys sitting in trees. More than once, Abeni had to stop her from running off to chase after butterflies. At times, she couldn't help but just stare and wonder. This was the same old woman who had once saved her, who she'd lived with, who had taught her, who had made a straw man come to life. Now she was this. How was she to ever get used to that? It was hard to tell how much of the Auntie Asha she knew was even left. Sometimes she asked questions of the girl, things she thought the old woman might know, but she got only a few answers and mostly shrugs or blank stares. And this girl couldn't do much of what the old woman could. Much. Make that most. Abeni had tried to get her to help fish once, but the girl had run laughing and splashing through the water, trying to catch fish with her hands. Having her help prepare food was just a mess. She didn't dare let her start a fire. But her magic, at least, wasn't gone entirely. Abeni knew all spirits held magic. How else to explain changing from an old woman into a little girl? Asha still held some bit of it. Entering Abeni's dreams was her favorite trick, especially dreams of Asha's garden. When asked how she did it, the girl only giggled. But other than those tricks, this Asha didn't seem able to work any great magic like before. Not the kind that created living houses with fantastic rooms, or the kind that might help or protect them. Even spirits have to learn, she told Abeni that first evening. The two sat on a big rock, watching the sky turn red, then orange and almost pink with sunset. Asha strung together a necklace as she spoke, made up of leaves and flower petals. I'll have to spend another lifetime rediscovering everything I've lost. She grinned, holding up the completed necklace as Abeni bent her head to have it slipped on. I think it might be fun. Not everything had been lost. Asha may not have known every plant or bush like before. She couldn't put a name to each tree just by sight of a leaf. But she had a sense of things. One time she knocked some red berries out of Abeni's hand, warning they were poisonous, though she couldn't say how she knew. If she sniffed the air and claimed it might rain, it usually did. She always managed to find water or a clearing and shade to rest, and she steered them away from parts of the forest she said looked wrong. Abeni was certain to listen to her about that. The next day as they walked, she tried a new topic. You told me your sister is like you, the one we're going to see. Who are the people she looks after? The people in the valley, Asha answered. She was balancing on a fallen tree branch on one foot. She takes care of them and the valley. So she's not a little girl then. Asha shook her head, laughing. I told you already, she's big, very, very big. She extended her small arms as far as she could and puffed out her cheeks. Abeni had asked that question 3 times since they'd set out, and had gotten the same answer each time, even the very, very big part. She just wanted to make sure. A fine thing it would be to find out their sister had become a little girl too. No one to give her the answers she sought, and she'd probably have to take care of them both. Are all spirits like you two? She asked. Do they look after people? Asha laughed a little girl's laugh. Of course not. There are all kinds of spirits. Some look after rivers, or rocks, or mountains. There are spirits who look after plants and trees. I once knew a spirit who tended a small field of yams, but lots of spirits don't really look after anything. They just are, and most don't have much to do with people. Some even pretend you don't exist. Then why do you and your sister look after people? Asha only shrugged. Someone has to. Abeni didn't know what to make of that answer, but before she could ask anything else, Asha gave a big mouth yawn. I'm tired, she whined. That was another thing. Asha could be all bursts of energy one moment, then needing to rest the next. She supposed those little legs could only walk so much. We'll rest here, she sighed, stopping beneath a tree with wide leaves for shade. She reached into the big bag and pulled out a blanket, spreading it for them to sit on. Then she pulled out a honey cake, a gourd of water, and 2 cups. She broke the cake apart, and the two sat down, nibbling. Abeni had finished one piece and reached for another, but found it gone. She frowned. That was odd. She had broken the cake into 4 pieces. They'd eaten 2, but now there were none. Asha, did you take the other pieces of cake? The girl shook her head. She was eating and counting her fingers and toes, something she'd done at least 3 times already, as if expecting some to go missing. Abeni sat, puzzled. This wasn't the first time food had vanished. Yesterday she'd set out pieces of bread with some smoked fish for dinner, but when they were ready to eat, some had gone missing. She thought she'd counted wrong. Now it was happening again. What was going on? Looking around, her eyes caught something on the ground. She walked over, bending down to inspect it. Crumbs. She picked up a bit and sniffed. Honey cake. The crumbs left a trail, which she followed to a set of bushes. She was about to inspect them when their leaves suddenly shook. Abeni jumped. Something was in the bushes. Running back to the blanket, she snatched up her staff. "Asha," she whispered, "I think we're being followed." "Yes," the girl agreed, still counting toes. "Since yesterday." Abeni glared. "What? Why didn't you say anything before now?" Asha looked up and blinked. "You didn't ask before now." Abeni had no idea how to even respond to that. The bushes shook again, and she bit her lip in worry. "Is it something dangerous?" "I don't think so," Asha said. "Oh, I lost my count." Abeni kept her eyes on the bushes. Whatever was in there, Asha would have at least warned if it was dangerous. Still, she didn't like being followed. Crouching, she crept towards the bushes, trying to make out anyone in there. But she saw nothing. Bracing herself, she lifted her staff to push the leaves aside. Still, nothing. Just a strong smell like flowers that tickled her nose and then was gone. She poked all through the bushes until she was convinced they were truly empty. Giving up, she walked back to Asha. "Well, whatever it was seems to be gone," she said. "You probably scared them," the girl responded. Abeni's eyebrows rose. "They shouldn't be following us." "You aren't worried?" Asha shook her head absently. "No." Abeni sighed. If the girl wasn't concerned, maybe she shouldn't be either. After all, a thief who stole pieces of cake and who smelled like flowers couldn't be much trouble. When they started out again, she was more mindful of her surroundings. Every now and then she peeked back, but didn't turn around. Their follower left clear signs. Bushes moved here. Plants shifted there. One time, a small branch fell from a tree. Whoever this was, they were terrible at sneaking. It was a wonder they'd stayed hidden this long. But even if they weren't dangerous, she couldn't have someone skulking behind them, and she couldn't spend the rest of this journey looking over her shoulder. Worse, they were running out of cake. Her mind made up, Abeni stopped. "Are we resting again?" Asha asked. "Yes." She pulled a blanket from the bag and laid it out. "Let's play a game." Asha's dark eyes lit up and she clapped. The girl loved a good game. One of her favorites was waking Abeni up with tickling. Those little fingers went everywhere. "Let's pretend we're asleep," Abeni said, "and see who can go the longest." I can, Asha shouted. "We'll see." Abeni chanced a glance behind them and took out some pieces of honey cake. One she gave to Asha and kept another for herself. A third piece she set nearby. Asha quickly chomped hers down, but Abeni ate slowly, a hand on her staff. "Time to play," she said, finishing, "and no tickling." Asha lay down right away, squeezing her eyes tight. Abeni followed, resting her head on her palm, then waited. It didn't take long before a familiar scent tickled her nose, like flowers. It was followed by the sounds of someone eating noisily, lots of smacking and swallowing. Gripping hold of her staff, Abeni jumped up from the blanket. "Thief!" she cried out. But that was all she could say because she wasn't even sure what she was staring at. The person in front of her, with a mouth stuffed full of honey cake, looked like a girl, maybe her own age, though a little shorter. Bits of fur covered her brown skin, and each of her fingers ended in a small, curved, black claw. But it was the long, thin, striped things covering her that stood out. each ending in sharp points. Were those quills like a porcupine? Come to think of it, she sort of looked like a porcupine. At seeing Abeni, the girl's eyes rounded, her pupils growing impossibly wide until they were like black plums. She dropped the honey cake and let out something between a choke and a shriek. There was a sudden burst of pink mist, followed by an even stronger smell of flowers, and she was gone. Abeni gasped and gaped. What had she just seen? Their thief was a porcupine, or a girl, or both. A porcupine girl? And she could make herself disappear. Wait, she cried, I'm not going to hurt you. But there was no answer. She picked up the dropped piece of cake. Here, you can have this if you like. I just want to see who you are. For a while, there was only quiet. Then there came a voice, squeaky and shaking. You scared me. Abeni looked up to find someone sitting on a tree branch high above. It was the porcupine girl. Her quills were raised, and they quivered with her trembling. I'm sorry, Abeni said, staring at the girl in wonder. I didn't mean to scare you. I just wanted to know who was following us. Please, come down. I have more cake. The porcupine girl frowned, looking uncertain, but as she eyed the honey cake, she licked her lips. There was another burst of pink mist, and she disappeared. A second slight explosion nearby also let off the scent of flowers. Abeni whirled about to find the porcupine girl standing across from her. Her black eyes were wary, but she also licked her lips, glancing at the honey cake. I meant what I said, Abeni told her. You can have it. The porcupine girl hesitated, then quickly snatched the cake away before jumping back. Abeni crouched, watching. Those quills had settled a bit. A good sign, she hoped. Now that she'd had a better look, she saw that the girl didn't have them everywhere. The larger ones mostly covered her back, chest, and torso, almost like clothing. Her arms and legs remained exposed, showing limbs that looked like any other girl. So did her face, though tufts of gold fur sat on her cheeks. The quills even covered her head, flat and sloping down like hair. Asha, who was still playing the sleeping game, opened her eyes. Ooh, prickly! Jumping up, she bounded over. Abeni tried to stop her, fearing the flighty porcupine girl would vanish, but she only glanced sideways at Asha, who was playing with the sharp tips of her quills. You're a spirit, the porcupine girl said in her high voice. She turned to Abeni. You're a mortal. Abeni nodded, though she'd never been called a mortal before. A mortal and a spirit, walking through the forest. How strange. Abeni's my guardian, Asha blurted out. The porcupine girl eyed Abeni, her small, flat nose wrinkling with doubt as she finished off the honey cake. You're rather small for a guardian. Didn't she know it? And what are you? She asked, hoping that wasn't rude. The girl seemed puzzled at the question. I'm a porcupine spirit, of course. A porcupine spirit. That explained why she was, well, the way she was. I don't suppose you've seen any others? The girl asked. Porcupine spirits like me, but taller? Pretty quills? Great dancers? Abeni shook her head. You're the only one I've seen. Ever. The porcupine girl sighed. Then she scowled. You know, you shouldn't go around scaring people like that with your big stick. It's not polite. Abeni was taken aback. You shouldn't go around sneaking behind people and stealing their food. That's not polite either. The porcupine girl puffed up, offended. I wasn't stealing. I was just borrowing. Abeni stared at her. How did you borrow food? Why were you following us? The porcupine girl's scowl evaporated, and she shrugged sheepishly. I thought you might make good company. Oh, Abeni said in surprise. You could have just come out and said so. I was scared. Scared? Abeni couldn't imagine what was so frightening about her and Asha. Are you alone? The porcupine girl nodded. Prickly's lost, Asha said. The porcupine girl nodded again and sat on the ground. We were fleeing the war, my family and I, she told them. You mean the war against the witch priest? Abeni asked. The porcupine girl's face turned fearful. Don't say his name. Anyway, we left our home to escape all the fighting. I was following like I'd been told, but I saw some butterflies and I wanted to dance with them. I love butterflies, Asha exclaimed. Aren't they the best? The porcupine girl agreed. An excited grin lit up her face before dying away. It was a wonderful dance. But when I tried to find my family again, I couldn't. I looked everywhere. I waited for them, but they were gone, and I was alone. Abeni knew all too well what that was like. How long have you been out here? 4 days? Or maybe 60? The spirit frowned. I'm not sure how it works in mortal time. Is your family nearby? Mortals do live in families too, don't they? Abeni opened her mouth to answer, but found she didn't want to retell that story. My family's gone, was all she said. It's just the two of us. Oh, where are the two of you going? To see my sister, Asha blurted out, extending her arms. She's very, very big. Oh, the porcupine girl said again. That sounds nice. Her shoulders drooped, and she stared down at her hands. Abeni studied her. Another spirit. She'd never thought she'd see a spirit in her life. Now, here were two she'd met. Neither looked like anything she'd expected. They weren't big or fantastic or scary like the masks at Harvest Festival. They were just girls, like her. As bad as she thought she had it, being out here alone must have been worse. She had barely thought out her next words before she posed the question. Do you want to come with us? The porcupine girl shot up to her feet. Oh, yes, most definitely so. I mean to say, if it's not too much trouble. Benny smiled. No trouble. Asha says her sister knows lots of things. Maybe she knows where your family is. The porcupine girl perked up at that. I can't promise anything, Benny added hastily, but there's a chance. Chances seem the most anyone could hope for right now. Prickly's coming with us, Asha cheered, doing a little dance and shaking her locks from side to side. Asha, Abeni scolded. I'm sure her name isn't Prickly. I'm Naomi, the porcupine girl put in. My mother says spirits shouldn't give names so easily, especially to mortals. But if we're going to be friends and travel together, I think we should know each other's names. And you don't seem so bad for a mortal. Though, come to think of it, I don't know any mortals, that is. Now you do, Abeni said. She introduced herself and Asha. Abeni and Asha, the porcupine girl repeated. Do you have any more cake? Abeni reached down to her blanket where her portion remained. She broke it into 3 smaller pieces so they could all share. Abeni, the porcupine girl asked, munching, how is it you can understand me? Spirits understand all tongues, but you're just a mortal, no offense. Abeni chewed down a bit of cake and rubbed her belly. I swallowed a rock, she said. Naomi looked at her puzzled. Is that a mortal joke? It's an actual story, Abeni replied, but not that interesting. Tell me more about you. The porcupine girl's eyes lit up and she eagerly began to talk, continuing long after the sun had descended behind them. Over the next 2 days, they got to know Naomi more, and she turned out to be the strangest person, spirit, Abeni had ever met. She spent a lot of time dancing, something porcupine spirits were supposedly very good at. At any moment, she could vanish to chase fireflies or a beetle, both of which it turned out she ate. Abeni tried not to stare as the girl slurped down worms and bugs she found under rocks. Porcupines she'd seen around her village mostly ate flowers and the bark off trees, and so did Naomi, but she also liked her share of crawly things. Maybe this spirit was part mole. Asha loved it, of course, and more than once Abeni had to stop her from trying to gnaw on a tree or slurp down worms as well. The porcupine girl's most favorite food was honey. They couldn't come across a beehive without her trying to get some. Twice they'd been forced to run away from angry swarms as Naomi made off with dripping combs, their only warning a shout to run as she charged past. After a harrowing flight that ended with them jumping into a small pond, Abeni convinced the spirit to at least warn them first, when she went honey stealing. And the porcupine girl could talk. Goodness, she could talk. Naomi talked about her family, about the things she'd seen, the other spirits she'd met, and just about everything. That second day after their meeting, she spoke through the afternoon and into the night. Fortunately, it seemed spirits needed their sleep too, though the porcupine girl muttered even then. Abeni didn't mind it so much. She supposed after being alone, Naomi just needed to talk to someone. She'd calm down eventually, at least she hoped. Besides, if the porcupine girl did all the talking, that meant Abeni didn't have to speak about her own past, or Asha's. Some things she didn't feel like sharing. Maybe she was getting better at keeping secrets. In her endless talks, sometimes Naomi mentioned the war. Abeni listened close at those moments, hoping to pick up things she couldn't learn from Asha. And we saw a whole bunch of mortals, the porcupine related once. They were all carrying great big shields of cowhide with spears fitted onto their backs, long ones and short ones. One of my cousins on my mother's sister's side said they were warriors from somewhere far in the south, and that they'd come up to join other mortals here in the west against the... She lowered her voice to a whisper. The witch priest. There were so many, and with those spears with black, sharp tips, we all stayed hidden while they passed. No one thought it was a good idea to dance for them. The West, Abeni mused. She never knew she lived in the West. West of what, she wondered. Have you ever heard of ghost ships, she asked. Naomi shook her head while digging through some dirt. No, they sound scary. The porcupine girl appeared to be scared of many things, an almost endless list. How about storm women, she pressed. Warriors with fire in their eyes. This time, Naomi shivered down to her quills. No, they sound even scarier. What about a man in a mask made of goat horns with a magic flute? Naomi shook her head again. Sorry. She plucked some fat white grubs from the soil and popped them in her mouth, chomping as she talked. I have met some goat spirits. They just sit chewing all day, chew, 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 and they'll eat anything. Benny sat back, disappointed. She put those questions to the younger Asha more than once, but the little girl only shook her head blankly. Naomi did provide some useful information. Though she had never spent time among mortals, others in her extensive family had visited mortal towns, even these things called cities. She related their stories, confirming what the old woman had told Abeni. She listened to it all, half in fascination. She wondered if she would ever see such places. It was on their third day since meeting, as Abeni listened to Naomi go on about some very rude meerkats, that she heard a faint sound. She had to drown out the porcupine girl to listen properly. "Did you hear that?" she asked. The porcupine girl went quiet. "Hear what?" "A sound, like someone crying." Naomi tilted her head, eyes going wide. "Oh, I do hear it. It came from there." Both turned to find Asha gesturing in the distance. "You're not going to try and find them, are you?" Naomi asked worriedly. Abeni thought on that for a moment. They had their own way to go, and they certainly couldn't be stopping for everyone. On the other hand, people don't cry for no reason. "Someone could be hurt," she said, "or in trouble." Naomi's hands fidgeted. "But shouldn't we stay away from trouble?" Abeni ignored the girl, who muttered something about not doing well with trouble before vanishing into pink mist. Well, at least this way she'd remain quiet. As she and Asha got closer, the crying grew louder. It did sound like someone was in trouble. Pushing past some brush, they entered a clearing and found an unexpected sight. A girl. She knelt in the grass, wearing a dress that glistened like black fur. Her head lifted at seeing them, revealing a strikingly pretty face, framed by long black hair braided and parted down the middle. "Help me," she pleaded, her big brown eyes streaming tears. Abeni ran over. "What's wrong?" "I'm trapped." The girl lifted an arm. Around her wrist was a small rope knotted with bits of red cloth. It was tied to an iron spike driven into the ground. "How did this happen?" Abeni asked, bending down to inspect the rope. "Men from a village nearby," the girl cried. "They tied me here." "Why?" Abeni asked. She couldn't imagine men of her village doing such a thing. "They say I'm a demon. They're crazy. Get me out, please." Abeni looked over the rope. The knots didn't seem hard to undo. "Please hurry," the girl begged, her face frightened. "They might come back." "Just a moment," Abeni said, her fingers already working on the knots. "There, it's loose. You can—" Abeni blinked. The rope was somehow tied again. How could that have happened? She set to loosening it a second time. Asha came over, crouching to stare at the girl, who stared right back. Undoing the knots seemed harder, but they finally gave way. Abeni let out a relieved breath, but no sooner had she done so than the knots quickly retied themselves. She glared at the rope in exasperation. "What is this thing?" "Just a rope," the girl said. "Try again." Abeni shook her head. "It won't stay loose." Thoughts of the ropes that had snatched away the people of her village came to mind, and she flinched away. Memories flashed, her trying to cut at those ropes to free her brother, his screams as they tightened about him, the fear on his face as they pulled him into the dark. "Please, you have to try," the girl wailed. She cast frantic glances into the distance and looked like she might cry again. Abeni pushed away the haunting images. This wasn't the same thing. It wasn't. Gritting her teeth, she gingerly put fingers to the odd rope, starting on the knots a third time. Asha moved to hover over her, watching with interest. "Abeni," she jumped. It was Naomi, or at least her voice. "People are coming." The tied-up girl looked around confused, searching for the voice. Abeni turned at Naomi's warning. Sure enough, there was movement in the bush and voices. She grabbed her staff, standing up just as 3 men stepped into the clearing. One, tall and thin with a long face, carried a spear. Another, with nostrils that flared as he breathed, also held a spear and a short bow. A third man, bigger than the others and with tiny eyes for his face, carried a stick with a bulging knot at the end. The three stopped in their tracks, staring at Abeni in surprise. She stared back. She hadn't seen people who were just people since her village. These men dressed differently, in bright red cloth that was slung over one shoulder and hung to their knees, and they wore their hair shaved except for little tufts dyed red in the front. But otherwise, they could have fit right in at her village. She almost smiled at seeing them until she noticed their faces, hard and cold as rock. Their eyes went to the tied-up girl. At the sight of her, they grinned and cheered as if at some great victory. "Caught you," the tall man with the spear shouted. "Thought you'd get away, eh?" another said, shaking his cudgel. "Not from us," a third echoed with a whoop. Abeni frowned. These men were happy at catching a girl. "Good day, uncles," Abeni said, bowing respectfully. The man with the long face fixed on her again. His smile vanished. "Who are you?" he asked. "My name is Abeni, uncle," she answered, bowing again. "This is Asha. We were just passing through. May I ask, why have you tied up this girl?" "That's no girl," the big man spat. "The rope doesn't catch girls," the man with the bow added. "Only demons." "A demon has been raiding our village," the tall man said, "making off with our goats. We set a trap, a magic rope she couldn't undo." Abeni looked to the girl. Her large eyes stared up in fright, and she shook all over. A demon? These men weren't making sense. She turned back to them. "I am sorry, uncles, but I find that hard to believe." The narrow-faced man scowled. "We don't care what you believe. We don't have to explain ourselves to some disrespectful child. We've caught this demon, and we're going to make sure it doesn't menace us again." He lifted his spear, stepping forward. "Wait," Abeni cried. "Uncles, look at her. She's just a girl." The three men did look, but nothing in their faces softened. "Just a girl," the narrow-faced man mocked. "First, some of our children run off. Then our goats are snatched away. Are we to believe some demon is not involved?" Abeni went still. "Your children? What's happened to your children, uncle?" The man seemed puzzled by her question, but he answered, "Not all our children, just some. They claim they hear a song calling to them at night when they sleep. Then, the next day they vanish. We caught one as she left, brought her back and tied her up, but in the morning she was gone. The ropes we'd bound her with at her feet, it looked as if she'd chewed through them." He shook his head. "That is why we set a trap, to capture the evil that plagues us." Abeni's mind was a jumble. All she could think of was the day her village had fallen, her friends walking off in a daze, the man in the goat horn mask with his flute and his song. It was happening here too, only he was stealing away children through their dreams. "Do you hear it?" she asked. "The song?" All three men shifted uncomfortably. "Never," the narrow-faced one said. "It is only the children who hear it, only they who it calls." "What do they tell you about the song?" Abeni pressed. "Do they speak about a man in a mask of goat horns, or storm women, living ropes that steal away people?" She spoke in a rush. The men stared at her like she might have sun sickness, but something in their stricken faces said her words were not all unfamiliar. "I know nothing of storm women or living ropes," the narrow-faced man said quietly. "But the children, those we were able to hold back for a brief time, spoke of seeing a man concealed behind a mask of goat horns in their dreams, a man who walks with monsters. Abeni's breath caught. It was him. But monsters? That was new. Why do you ask such questions? Another man asked. She turned to find his eyes glaring in unmistakable suspicion. How do you know what was in the dreams of our children? Where do you come from? Who are your people? You say you are passing through our lands, but you speak our tongue with ease. How is that possible? Abeni stumbled. That would all be hard to explain. She's with the demon, the big man barked. Probably a witch. The narrow-faced man's eyes widened at Abeni as if she'd sprouted horns. He gripped his spear tighter. We captured the demon and arrived to find you trying to free it. Now you ask about the song. Who are you? What are you? Do you work with the one who stole our children? What have you done with them? He was shouting now, his face moving from fear to growing rage. Abeni stared at them all. They thought she was working with the man in the goat horn mask. They had it all wrong. But she didn't know what to say. How could she explain? I'll get the witch to talk, the big man growled. He stalked forward, lifting his cudgel. Abeni stared in shock. Was this big man going to try and hit her? She brought her staff up hurriedly. Farmer Beats for Snakes wrapped him on both hands. He dropped his cudgel, crying out and grabbing his injured knuckles. She put sorcery on my hands, he bawled. Witch, witch. Abeni glared at the man. Ridiculous. She just hit him, was all, the big baby. She was set to say as much, but never got the chance as his companions charged. Abeni's staff came up to block them. Until today, she'd never used her training on anyone but Obi. Sparring with the straw man hadn't been easy, but this was an actual fight. She was surprised how easily the forms came to her. Tree sways in a breeze let her duck a cudgel swung for her head. Frog hops the pond kept her nimble to avoid darting spear points, and seeding the field sent fast strikes to arms and shins. The men were surprised too. Yelping in pain and growing angrier by the moment, a thrust of a spear came much too close, and she was reminded that unlike Obi, these men would truly hurt her. She glanced to Asha, but the little girl paid no attention to the fight at all. Her eyes stared at the rope as if nothing else were happening. Abeni, look out! She was suddenly pushed away by something unseen just as an arrow whooshed past, hitting a tree with a loud kerthunk. One of the men had shot at her. There was an explosion of pink mist accompanied by the smell of flowers, and she found the porcupine girl standing there. Thank you, Abeni stammered. I think you saved my life. Naomi didn't respond. Her large black pupils were wide with fear, and she was staring at the man with the bow, who looked back dumbstruck. With a shriek, she disappeared again, releasing a volley of quills right at his face. The man howled as the needles peppered him. Spinning about, he got another set to his backside. He dropped the bow and jumped higher than Abeni thought he could, trying to pull the quills out. The two other men paused at seeing the porcupine girl, but they didn't give up. They looked ready to charge again, just as Asha exclaimed, There! Abeni looked to find she had loosened the rope. This time, it didn't retie itself, but fell away limply. The trapped girl pulled her arm free and stood, rubbing the mark on her wrist. She smiled, setting her gaze on the three men. Then the girl changed. Her brown eyes turned a bright orange. She no longer seemed afraid at all. The corner of her lips curled up into a growl, and she went down on all fours. Hands and feet became paws with sharp claws. Her black dress seemed to grow until the dark fur covered her completely. Her ears turned sharp, while a tail twitched behind. Abeni had barely blinked before it was all over. In the girl's place, there was a panther, sleek and black as night. The big cat wasn't fully grown, but not small either. It stalked towards the three men, a low rumbling coming up from its throat. Then it roared. It's one thing to hear a story or stories about spirit, like how we go to the movies, right? And we see Thor and Asgard and all the different gods and the fighting and all of that stuff. It's one thing to hear stories. It's another thing to come face to face with spirit in your real life and to see how real spirit really is. And to be called immortal, it's like, wait a minute, I'm just a mortal. But even though she's just a mortal, she was trained by a powerful spirit. When Auntie Asha was Auntie Asha, the old, centuries old, experienced spirit. And her training came in handy when she was fighting other mortals. So it's kind of cool to tap into spirit, right? Because it pops in at the right time when you have that right training by a proper trainer. And it's interesting to hear how Asha doesn't know, like she's little girl Asha right now, but all of her magic isn't gone from her. She just has to remember it. And so as she saw the rope, as she sat there and concentrated and focused on the rope, her magic memories came back to her. And when she untied the rope, it stayed untied because she's a spirit. She's not just a mortal. So it's interesting to see and read all of how spirit and human beings interact in a situation like this. And it's also interesting to see how human beings assume off top, just putting their perspective on the situation, not understanding that Abeni is not a witch. And she's not. But once somebody labels you that, whatever perspective they have about you in their mind, that's what you are. So once they started calling her a witch, they couldn't see nothing else. So she had to fight. Thankfully, her training just popped in like that, and she was able to protect herself. Now, the little girl that got freed, that Asha freed from that red rope, clearly is also a spirit, like the little porcupine spirit that has been following them and ate their honey cake and is scared of everything, but still got some magic about her. Thankfully, her quills helped in the battle against the three mortal men. But this Black Panther, she sounds fierce. Hopefully, she's thankful to Abeni and Asha and Naomi for setting her free. Because all spirits aren't necessarily kind to mortals or on the side of mortals, as we've seen in the story and maybe experienced in our real life. But anyway, hopefully the Black Panther is thankful to the trio for freeing her up. And it's interesting that she's a Black Panther. Just a little note, the Black Panther was not new, wasn't discovered by Marvel. It wasn't even dreamed up by I forget the old white man that's giving credit for writing that story. And he was very creative when he, put the Marvel story together. But the inspiration, I would say, for the story is real. Because the Black Panther there's a real secret society that is associated with the panther spirit and other spirits on the continent of Africa among indigenous African people. But that's for another book, another story, another time. Let's see what happens now that the Black Panther has been released. The roar shook the air, and the three men screamed. They turned on their heels and ran, stumbling over themselves to get away. The big man ran fastest of all, quills still in his backside. They crashed headlong through the bush, crying of demons in the forest. The panther kept roaring until the three were finally out of sight. Appearing satisfied, the big cat turned back and changed once again. Abeni watched, mouth open. The panther didn't become the girl in the trap. Her dress had been replaced by a band of black fur around her chest and another bit at her waist, like a skirt, leaving her middle bare. Her long arms showed off muscle, and each finger on her hands ended in sharp, curving claws, much like her feet. She seemed taller, too. Her hair was no longer neatly braided and instead fell in a tangle of black locks that covered half her face. Her dark skin now shined like polished stone, and her cat eyes nearly glowed in the sunlight. She was still striking, just in a different way. What was she? Abeni wondered. Her answer came with the scent of flowers. Panther spirit, Naomi appeared suddenly. I knew something wasn't right. The panther girl pushed aside the locks in her face and sniffed. Porcupine spirit. Her low voice carried the hint of a growl. She waved at the air as if clearing it. I thought I smelled flowers. Naomi whirled back to Abeni. I told you not to stop. She's trouble. The panther girl yawned. Shouldn't you be dancing or jumping at your own shadow, porcupine girl? Better than being disliked by everyone you meet, Naomi shot back. The panther girl's eyes narrowed. Go chew on a tree. Naomi opened her mouth to retort, and Abeni decided to step in. Hello, she said. I'm Abeni. The panther girl didn't look her way. Instead, turning from Naomi to Asha, she crouched and smiled, showing a set of gleaming teeth, some of them sharp. My little rescuer, she said. Asha stared at the sharp teeth in wonder, then bared her own and growled in imitation. The panther girl threw back her head and laughed. What manner of spirit are you? So small, but much more. Abeni looked on awkwardly. It was nice of the panther girl to thank Asha, but she was the one who had come to her rescue. Clearing her throat, she stepped forward. I'm Abeni, she tried again. This time the panther girl turned to look up at her with flat orange eyes. I heard you the first time, mortal. I just wasn't interested. Abeni stepped back, stunned at the rudeness. That's not very nice, Ania, Asha scolded. The panther girl's head snapped about in alarm. She shot to her feet. You know my name, and you speak it. In front of a mortal? Why would you do such a thing? Asha shrugged. It's only a name. To tell a mortal a spirit's name is to grant them power over us. That's silly, Zania, Asha snapped, sounding for a moment very much like the old woman. Abeni doesn't want power over you. She's the one that came at your cry. You should be thanking her. Zania stared down at Asha, who stared back, unblinking. Whatever passed between them, the panther girl broke away first and turned to Abeni. She bowed her head stiffly. You stopped to free me when you could have walked on. For that I owe you thanks. It should not be thought that panther spirits are ungrateful. It's nothing, Abeni said. I'm sure you would have done the same. When there was no answer, she spoke again. So, you're a spirit? And you a mortal, the girl replied flatly. There, we both know things. Abeni felt her face heat. Why did this girl make her feel stupid just for talking? Those men said you stole their goats, she asked. I was hungry. Goats are for eating. Oh, I know what that's like. Back home when my friend Fomi and I were hungry, we'd taste soups or steal fried yam. Abeni trailed off as she saw the other girl's disinterested look shift between her and Asha. Where is this home of yours? Zania asked. Not here, since those other mortals didn't know you. I'm from another part of the forest, Abeni answered. The panther girl cocked her head. Out here. Alone. Strange for a mortal girl. And in the company of two spirits. Very strange. Where is your family? Where is your mortal settlement? What do you call them? Villages. Abeni's mouth went dry. She hadn't had to answer much of that with Naomi. Obviously, panther spirits were more curious than porcupine spirits. Or maybe it was just this one. Abeni's my guardian, Asha put in. Zania frowned, looking Abeni over. You're small for a guardian. Abeni returned a tight smile. Second time she'd heard that in 2 days. Are you out here alone? She asked. The panther girl's face darkened. I've lost my sisters. I'm sorry, Abeni said. How did you lose them? She snarled. We were attacked by mortals. Mortals who think of us as nothing more than demons. Mortals like you. I'm not like that, Abeni protested. I fought those men to save you. Because I looked like a helpless mortal, Zania retorted. In a blur, she was the pretty girl again, with big brown eyes on the verge of tears. She's who you want to help to save. Another shift, and the panther girl was back, orange eyes flashing. If you had seen me as you do now, would you have been so quick to help? Abeni was taken aback by the question. The panther girl now looked admittedly more frightening, but she liked to believe she would have done the same thing. Yes, she said, I would have, because those men were wrong. Zania said nothing, then shrugged. Perhaps you are better than most mortals. The men who attacked my sisters and me marched beneath the banner of the witch priest. He gave them weapons made with dark magics to hunt us. When they came, we fled. I have been lost from them since. Abeni found the tale too familiar. Had everyone been hurt by this war? You must have been frightened, she said. I was not frightened, Zania retorted hotly. I'm no coward. No, Abeni apologized. She was a touchy one. I'm just saying I understand. The panther girl looked away sullen. What would you know of it? Abeni didn't answer. More than most, she'd wager. Zania let out a breath, and the anger seemed to slip away. She sat down heavily, drawing her knees to her. I've walked with my sisters all my life. To now walk alone is a hard thing. You should come with us, Asha said. All three girls turned to the little spirit in surprise. Naomi shook her head. That's not a good idea. You heard those mortals? It wasn't only their goats who have gone missing. She leveled an accusing stare. A rumble came from the panther girl's throat. I do not eat mortal flesh. I understand it to be unpleasant. She showed a wide, sharp grin. porcupines, on the other hand. Naomi squeaked, disappearing in a pink mist. The panther girl chuckled. Too easy. Her attention turned to Abeni and Asha. Where are you going? Abeni hesitated. Naomi was one thing, but a panther was much different than a porcupine. What if she got hungry and decided one of them was a meal? Now you sound like those men, she thought, and felt a bit embarrassed. No, she knew better. Whatever else this panther girl was, she was lost and out here alone. A Benny wouldn't wish that on anyone. And a spirit who could turn into a panther might be useful. Asha has a sister, she said at last. Yes, she said as the little girl extended her arms wide. She's very big and she knows things. We're going to see her. She might know where your sisters are. The panther girl's orange eyes blazed bright with hope. No, Abeni, Naomi reappeared suddenly. This is a bad idea. We're all alone out here, Abeni told the porcupine girl. There'll probably be trouble like those men or worse. Better we're together than apart. But you don't know what she is, Naomi protested. Zania grunted. The talking prickly bush is right. Do you know what I am? Abeni met that fierce face. A girl who's lost. She turned to Naomi. We should all be able to see that. The panther girl's eyes narrowed to orange slits. I will not follow a mortal. Can't say she doesn't speak her mind, Abeni thought. Then follow Asha. Zania looked to the little girl before nodding. Asha cheered, going down on all fours while growling and pretending to tear up the ground like a panther. Naomi continued to shake her head. Abeni watched them all. Each had started out alone, but now they were together. Something about this seemed right. She just hoped she knew what she was getting herself into. So the panther girl is a different kind of spirit than the porcupine spirit, clearly. And she does not like mortals. Understandably so, because she stole their goats for food. They don't like her, they chase her away or whatever. But also just because that's her makeup. You can tell she's just kind of cocky. If you look at a cat, most cats seem like they don't want to be bothered unless they want to be bothered. If you have a pet cat, you know that when they want to be around you, they want to be around you, and they nudge up against you and they purr. But if they want their space, you can't make them cuddle with you for nothing in the world. And they have their own, they roll their eyes and everything. So big cats, small cats, they have a kind of aloof personality about them, a kind of regal personality about themselves. But Abeni is smart to want to bring her along because obviously she has a connection to Asha. Asha freed her. She has respect for Asha because when they had their little stare down, she was the first to back away. Asha must be an older spirit than she is, even though she's a girl. And they're all young because Zania isn't a full-grown adult panther. And it's interesting how like is attracting like. Abeni is a girl. She's 13. She's a young woman, culturally speaking, but she's still young. Asha is no longer the old woman. She's a little girl. Naomi is a girl. And Zania is a girl. And they've all gotten separated from their families, except for Asha, because she is her own full circle, just at the girl portion of her circle. So the four of them, is it four? Asha, Zania, Naomi, Abeni. Yes, the four of them should be able to guide, help, support each other along this journey. And thankfully so, because not even spirits want to be out there alone. Yes, they have their skill set, but they traveled in groups. The porcupine spirit, the Black Panther spirit, nothing in nature, because spirit is natural, nothing in nature is meant to be alone. Not mortals, not spirits, not trees, not flowers, not leaves on the trees. Nothing is meant to be alone. Not clouds, not water droplets. Everything is supposed to have something beside it to express its energy with. So it's a good thing that they're traveling together. Now, hopefully, they'll be able to make their way to Asha's sister. And, well, they all have their reasons for finding Asha's sister. It's reminding me of the Wiz. For some, it's the Wizard of Oz. For others, like me, it's the Wiz. But I'm liking it. Again, I could definitely see this as a movie. I love it. Until next chapter.